So joining us on the line is Dana Cowin, the editor-in-chief of Food and Wine. Her latest book, Mastering My Mistakes in the Kitchen, is out, and she's joining us. Now, Dana, you make a big confession in this book, and you have said many times that you have made mistakes in the kitchen. Talk to me about why you decided to reveal that.
Let's stop stumbling. Let's just actually learn to cook, particularly because I have such great teachers. I knew that if I asked the chefs that I know, that we feature in the magazine, the chefs who we discover and write about all the time, that I would have the world's best.
Yeah, we're talking people like David Chang, Jonathan Waxman, April Bloomfield, and all of these particular people tend to have their own culinary style, or they have a different cuisine that they've sort of mastered. Talk to me about that cross-section of America that we're seeing, and the changes that have happened in this new American kitchen, all these different cuisines that have become part of that.
Is, in fact, these chefs reflect a gigantic evolution of food in America, because if you look back, let's say 20 years ago, the best restaurants were mostly French with a smattering of great American, and then, I think Rick Dallas's Table of Bombo is 25 years old. There's a couple of outliers, but basically we were looking at a lot of French, some California, and some Italian. And over those tacos, ceviche, and so I think that there's been a shift in what we eat, and that shift in what we eat translates into a shift in what we cook at home, because we're so inspired. You go out, but you don't want to go out 7 nights a week, but you want to be able to.
Sure. And trying to make it at home, I'm sure people stumble into mistakes of their own. You've been very generous with us and have hit some of those mistakes yourself. What is the most common thing that people hit or bump when they're at home trying to make some of these dishes?
Most common mistake is not one that has to do with technique, which surprised me because I thought it was all going to be about like the cooking classes I didn't take, coming back to haunt me that I hadn't had any training. But I think the most common mistake is that people do not focus. and they do not read all the way through recipes, and and those two mistakes will get you every time. Because, in fact, I was on a call-in show, radio show, and I was listening to all of the mistakes that people made, and most of them were because they took their focus off the dish that they were making. And so there's that old saying, if you can read, you can cook, which I don't believe at all. But I think that if you can focus, you can cook. That I believe 100%. And recipes are really an incredible roadmap. So when you look at a recipe, here's what you have to do. You have to look at the ingredient list and not say, I think I have that, but you need to pull out all those ingredients and measure them. Be sure you have enough of the ingredients. Be sure you have the right ingredients, not the kind of sorta. And then, because I found that mistake a couple of times when I was cooking, I was making waffles, and I realized halfway through, as I was beating the egg whites, that I didn't have enough oil, and I had to stop the recipe and go next door to my neighbor. Or I was making a chili, and this chili, it called for a certain type of tomatoes, but it turned out that I had a can of tomatoes, but it wasn't the right kind of tomatoes. So you have to pay attention. And you also have to read all the way through to figure out the timing. Another problem that people have is the timing. You don't leave enough time. And there's so many ways to go wrong with timing. Either you don't leave enough time to let it rest, you don't leave enough time to let it cook, you don't leave enough time to let it come to room temperature. There are things that we rush through because we think it does not matter, but it does. So you have to read through the whole recipe and be sure you've accounted for every minute. And if you have, I can promise you your food will turn out better. And the greatest thing about reading all the way through a recipe is you will never get to that last line that says, and refrigerate overnight, when you have guests coming in 3 hours. That's happened to me so many times. Like, wait a minute, I have to refrigerate this? Why didn't they tell me that at the beginning? But we recipe writers don't actually always tell you that early enough, so you have to read all the way through.
So how long did it end up taking you to put something like this together?
It was not such a quick process. It was about 2 years. But it was a process that I really enjoyed, and I did each part of it without trying to multitask. So when I worked on what was the list of recipes going to be, that is one sort of, I thought about that all together, and then testing the recipes with Julia Tertian. That was another section, and then shooting the recipes, another section. So everything was broken down into very sort of doable, let's say 1 month or shorter bits. Mm-hmm. So it never feels overwhelming if you break it all up, sort of like a recipe.